A very warm welcome to everyone who has joined us today. I am Meher Gandhi, and on behalf of Kalinga Literary Festival, I gladly welcome Ravi Venkatesan and Sanjay Jha for a much awaited conversation. I would like to introduce both of them to you. I know they don't need any introductions, but I would do that from my end. Ravi Venkatesan is a business leader, a philanthropist, and an author. He's the chairman at Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. Also, very importantly, he has been the special representative for young people at UNICEF. And at UNICEF, he has contributed greatly towards global partnerships and has been a keen supporter of innovations. Ravi sir has also held positions as the chairman of Bank of Baroda from 2015 to 2018, the chairman of Microsoft India, chairman of Cummins India, as well as the co-chairman of Infosys. He has authored the books titled Win in India, Win Everywhere, Conquering the Chaos, and what the heck do I do with my life? And that's a question that is very prevalent for a lot of us. And I know that for a fact. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us today.
Pleasure.
And we are looking forward to the conversation ahead. And now, kindly allow me to introduce you to Sanjay Jha, a TEDx speaker who has also been the national spokesperson of the Indian National Congress party beginning in 2013. Sanjay Jha is also the executive director at Dale Carnegie Training Operations in India. He has spoken at various institutions such as Columbia Business School in New York, UCLA, the Doon School, St. Xavier's College, and so many more. And he not only writes for National Herald and the Huffington Post, but has also authored a cricket anthology called 11 Triumphs, Trials, and Turbulence in Indian Cricket, and the book titled The Great Unraveling India After 2014. In fact, he has also co authored a book with Dr. Myra White from Harvard Medical School called The Superstar Syndrome. And we thank you so much, Sanjay sir, for joining us today and for making our evening beautiful. Thank you for joining us, and we welcome both the authors. And today, author Ravi Venkatesan will be in conversation with author Sanjay Jha about the former's book, "What the Heck Am I Doing with My Life?" And now I invite Sanjay sir to take over the stage. Thank you, sirs.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much. And the first thing I want to tell all the people who are on this show or program right now is that I've had the privilege of knowing my guest at a personal level now for over 2 decades. Of course, we lost contact in between, but I met Ravi when his head was black and when I had quite a plenty. Clearly, we have both changed, me perhaps more spectacularly. But when I was invited, Meher, by Kalinga Literary Festival to do the book, frankly speaking, I was more than thrilled. One, because it was Ravi. Second, because I just love reading, and I want to let you know that I just finished reading his book yesterday late evening, and this is the book. In case I hope you can see it very clearly, and it's fantastic. Let me just tell you up front, I don't need to wait till the end of the program and follow some template and then tell you why you should buy the book. It's an outstanding book. It's a very candid story of an individual, uh, very well qualified, etc., etc. But he takes you through his journey with several ups and downs, and has absolutely no compunctions in sharing with you, his fears, his anxieties. And as it happens, the book talks about the issues that confront the young India today. We live in an age of what he calls turbulent times, and don't we know that? And as we talk, I guess I need to make a further qualification, Ravi. This is not just a book for the young. This is not just a book for the people suffering a midlife crisis and an expanding, kind of hip and receding hairlines. It's not just about people who are superannuating or looking for a pension, or those who are probably in some stage of their lives still coping with the extraordinary challenges we face practically nowadays on a daily basis. How do you really battle it through? And I think this book is a remarkable commentary on that. So, Ravi, first and foremost, many congratulations for a brilliant commentary here.
Yeah, hey, thank you, Sanjay. I'm glad we're recording this because I'm going to take this endorsement and put it out there as much as
Yeah,
we can. But
yeah,
to me, the real delight of today is reconnecting with you. And I say that with the same joy that I sense is in you, because for 2 decades, our lives diverged.
yeah.
And then I did see a lot of you on television. And so I watched your own career and the evolution of your life and views. And now I'm in the early stages of your own book, The Great Unraveling. So yeah, I'm glad and grateful to Kalinga for bringing us together. And yeah, look forward to unpacking some of the ideas in the book that's relevant in a way that's exciting and interesting and relevant to our viewership.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Ravi. And therefore, without wasting any time, let me just dive deep into the whole book. It's got some outstanding chapters on success and how to handle your career, how to cope with the impact of technology, and so on. But Ravi, let me start by, I'm going to be the devil's advocate. I'm going to be for a moment, I'm going to wear, the dispassionate, impartial mask of somebody who probably hasn't known you at all, and we'll just probably come straight to the point. You mentioned that this is the age of optimism, and you mentioned that despite the fact that we have survived perhaps the most brutal fear that I think the world could have possibly ever experienced, perhaps even much more than the Spanish flu, because this literally was interspersed all over the world. You have a war going on in Europe at the moment. People are talking about World War III extremely casually. Handheld nuclear missiles could just be tried out if Mr. Putin has a bad stomach upset. So, we are talking about a situation today where there are authoritarian demagogues in different parts of the world. There is fear, there are job losses, economy is disrupted, and we know what's happening in Sri Lanka. How do you still hang on to the belief of the age of optimism?
Yeah, so it's a superb question, and you forgot. In addition, you can actually add quite a lot to that list of
Climate
things.
change.
Climate change for me. I was in Delhi yesterday, and I just haven't experienced such heat in some time. Certainly at this point in time, the surface temperature in many parts of India crossed 60 degrees centigrade. I mean,
Yeah.
those are temperatures we haven't heard of, right? And so, yeah, there's just a long list of issues. But then equally, you can read about the fact that India produced its 100th unicorn. Okay. So there's a lot of good stuff happening. The Economist's cover issue yesterday came out, and it's about India, saying, look, it's we in this darkness, India's economic prospects may be the brightest of most countries. And the question they pose is, will we squander this opportunity and fumble it, or are we going to seize this? Or, that's really the question. So we live in a curious time. There's lots of things to feel terrified about, depressed about, anxious about. And at the same time, there lots of wonderful things happening. For instance, technological progress and the kind of things it's enabling. Right? There's that book, wonderful book by what's his name? The Swedish guy, Hans. I forget, but whatever. It's called Factfulness. It's a brilliant book, even though it's about 5 years old. It says, look, although you may be feeling that the world is falling apart, here's data that says objectively most human beings, average human being, has rarely had it so good. And my real point in this book is, even as everything is imploding around your ears, if you have the right mindset, if you have the right attitude, skills, and strategies, you can carve out a little bubble where things could be quite fantastic. And the whole book is about unpacking what sort of mindset, attitude, etc. Do you need to develop, cultivate, so forth. So yeah, I'm a big look. And what choice do you have? Okay,
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
um, right? You can get anxious, depressed, and be fearful, resentful, feel like a victim, and express it in multiple forums, or you can focus on the world immediately around you and try and see if you can carve out a bubble that's filled with hope, positivity, love, and prosperity. And
Yeah.
I think that's our choice. And I have chosen to go down the latter route. And I'm advocating for that in the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
No,
asked that, and for you, I think one of the things I said struck you, which is, hmm, when would you rather be a young person, right? If you're 25, 30 years old today, would you like to be a 25-year-old in 1950, when India was, newly independent, where there were no economic opportunities, we were a poor country, and the world was questioning whether we would even survive as a country? Would you like to have been young when you and I were young, when again there was scarcely any opportunities, and I left the country for 12, 13 years, not quite clear I wouldn't come back? Um, or would you like to be young today, when there are infinite opportunities if you know how to seize them? And yeah, my regret is I'm not young today, because I'd probably be trying to build a unicorn.
Well, viewers, let me tell you that here is a man. I won't be surprised. Who 20 years from now will be probably jogging in a marathon. But we'll come to that again, Ravi. And trust me, I'm sure your knee will be bouncing all over the place. Tell me, when you look at your life, I mean, you have headed some very exciting organizations, from a public sector bank. I remember when we met in Cummins in Pune.
Yeah, yeah.
It was a transformational experience, and of course your stint at Microsoft. Would you, like, this is the season of IPL, so let me borrow from the IPL. Would you call any particular episode a turning point, and any epiphany of sorts,
I, Look,
or
I want
were there many turning points? I mean, that's a
no, no,
possibility.
no. The thing I want to say is, look, these things, if you, as Steve Jobs said, you can connect the dots looking backwards. I certainly didn't plan to do these things, or even imagine I would have all these opportunities. But I think what is important is, when opportunity presented itself, I grabbed it. Okay. There are a lot of people who have opportunities, but they're afraid. They're afraid that they may fail, or the world will laugh at them, or whatever reason. To me,
Right.
the real turning point, if you ask me for a defining moment, I would say it was the decision to leave Cummins and join Microsoft. It presented itself in a somewhat unconventional way in 2003. I was 40 years old. I was doing extremely well, for myself at Cummins and in the manufacturing industry. But there was something very exciting about Microsoft, but it was also terrifying. And what was terrifying is 10 out of 10 people whose advice I sought, including my wife, my mom, Narayan Murthy, all said, don't do this. It's going to end badly. You're not a techie. That's a rough, tough culture. So don't do this. And then I asked myself, look, when I turn 50, which will I regret more, right? Joining Microsoft, and being fired for incompetence after 2 years, or that I look back with regret that I had this opportunity and I didn't take it. Microsoft was gave me courage, self confidence. It opened my mind. It opened my networks, and much of what has played out since then, I can attribute to that experience and that shift more than any other. But look, each of them was beautiful, challenging, and transformational, personally transformational in its own way. So yeah.
Yeah. Now, Ravi, it's interesting that when we talk about Microsoft, which brings me to one of your bosses there, perhaps the most famous one, Bill Gates. You write a very interesting point in your book, that get off social media, guys, is too toxic. You're fed with a lot of fake news, post truth, alternative facts as we all know them. And it's true, right? The conspiracy theories are floating around. You have people who actually believe that 5G and Bill Gates has been responsible for for the outbreak. How do you look at this? This ability of people to manipulate, to manufacture outrage, becoming so successful. Are human beings so susceptible, or is it the power of an information that is like deluged or created in some kind of avalanche at you repeatedly? How do you see this?
Yeah, I think you've answered the question in your question. So actually, this is a hot area for research. By the way, is the internet breaking up? Is the connection breaking up, or am I clear?
I can hear you clearly. In between, it just kind of froze for a few seconds. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So no, look, the historian Harari has written a lot of really good stuff about the human mind and how we tend to be wired for stories, to believe in stories more than facts and evidence and logic. While we prize the left side of our brain, it's the right side that is actually quite dominant for most of us. And yeah, he says, look, we're a post-truth society and have been for a long time. And then he even goes on to say, well, all these religions have understood this really well, because essentially every religion is a story,
Yeah.
and it's got great power to entice many and so forth. Now you combine this with technology and all these social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, particularly TikTok. These are engineered to take advantage of this. They're engineered to hook us and keep us engaged. And they've also figured out that bad news is way more enticing and gripping than good news. Okay.
Of course.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and since their whole business model is our attention, is monetizing our attention, they do whatever it takes to keep us engaged. And if it's by fanning incendiary information, true or otherwise, so be it. So, no, the other thing that happens is, because we choose who we want to follow, choose who we befriend, without realizing it, we'll end up building these bubbles in which we live. And so you can end up in bubble A or bubble B, and that's all you hear. And it tends to amplify what you already believe. So if you believe X about a certain religion, it'll amplify your belief about that religion. Okay. If you distrust or hate someone, you're going to distrust or hate them more. So it is engineered to do these things, and which is why about 2 years ago, I decided consciously to unplug off most of this stuff. And I can't tell you just how much saner I am. I still use it to
Right.
broadcast one way. Okay. If you want to get your ideas across, it's a powerful medium. But I'm
Yeah.
not out there. I have a team that puts stuff out on Twitter. I have a very, very large following on LinkedIn, but I'm not out there many hours a day devouring this information and getting into needless arguments and fights, and leaving angry with my stomach and knots. No, I just choose not to live my life that way. And in my book, you'll recognize this is not just Ravi. The guys who build these platforms are smarter than we are. They don't
Yeah.
use these platforms. Eric Schmidt, who was the
Yeah.
you know chairman of Google and CEO of Google before that. I love that quote where he says it's an amplifier for idiots.
Yeah.
Okay, it's Bill Gates doesn't scarcely uses his cell phone. Okay, scarcely. Steve Ballmer used to travel without a phone. So these technology executives are way smarter about the poisonous stuff they create than we are.
Yeah, yeah. And then, Ravi, you have the most powerful man on earth, a certain Mr. Trump, who wanted to announce a nuclear war against North Korea on Twitter. I mean, it's just incredible the kind of world we live in. And you're right. I mean, I just want to let you know from my experience. During the very difficult time when the party I represented was getting hammered in 2014, I used to be introduced in a couple of talk shows as the most hated man on Twitter, because every time you did anything, you had these internet trolls who just came on you. And you
Yeah.
had to realize, as you rightly said, you can't go onto Twitter and read the comment section. You just have to give it up. And
It-
it's interesting because I read about IPL players who are probably struggling in this tournament to avoid hate messages from fans. They don't go on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter anymore during the tournament because it just get them feeling very low and demotivated. So you're absolutely right. And to all the young people who are on this program, I think when you read the book, you'll understand why in further detail. But I think Ravi has actually articulated that brilliantly already. There's one question I wanted to ask you, Ravi, amongst many, and I'm glad so far we seem to be doing well on time. Is the term black swan, which has become obviously now currency post COVID. Practically everyone knows what black swan is. Pre COVID, I don't think many did. But you have, I think, very appropriately introduced the concept of what you call as the gray rhino. We all know about the gray rhino. And I just feel it'll be nice if you can tell the
Yeah.
viewers the difference between the two and why the gray rhino is something that very often slips right under our nose.
Yeah. So, no, it's a great question. See, a black swan event is something that is completely unforeseeable, and hard to predict, and with large consequences, right? So if an asteroid hits the Earth, like it did 65 million years ago, so it's a random event. You couldn't have foreseen it. It just is, and you deal with the consequences. And there are events like the Great Depression in America, which I talk about in the book, which are black swan events. Demonetization, in some ways, was a black swan. Nobody saw it coming, and you just had to deal with it. But what is way more dangerous are what are called gray rhinos. And a gray rhino is a very real, slow moving threat, which, because it's slow moving, is convenient to ignore. So if you go to Kaziranga in Assam and you see this big rhino out there in the distance, it's got its eye on you and its ears up, but it's basically chewing grass and looking peaceful. And so you think you can approach peace, to some extent, to take a photograph. And what you don't realize is when it wishes to, it's a pretty fast animal and a very vicious one. So it's wise to steer away. So a lot of our trends and events today are gray rhino in their nature. For instance, the pandemic, COVID-19. You can think, some of us think it was a black swan. Oh man, it just came out of nowhere and whacked us. That's not true. Any number of people, pandemic experts, people like Bill Gates have been warning for about 5 to 10 years.
Yeah,
Look, the
yeah.
conditions are ripe for viruses and organisms to arise, which can trigger a pandemic. And by the way, we are so unprepared, and we need to create these mechanisms. His new book, launched last week, is all
Yeah.
about saying, how do we create institutions, mechanisms for a century where there are likely to be many more pandemics. Climate change is a fantastic example of a gray rhino. We know it's real. We know it's our activity which is fueling it. And we know its consequences are going to be catastrophic. And yet we're all blissfully sleepwalking our way to disaster, right? We
Yeah.
haven't changed
So,
our own individual behaviors. The behavior of firms is not changing. Behavior of humanity is not changing. We just hope it'll go away. Another example of a gray rhino, nice controversial one, is communal hatred. Okay, you can watch that flame burning in a distance somewhere. It's happening in another state. It's happening somewhere else, and you hope and pray it won't come and touch you. But there's no telling. And once these fires start, you don't know how fast they'll spread and what direction they'll spread. So I think we're living in a time where there are just multiple of these dangers and threats. And the question I pose in chapter 1 is, hey, don't just dismiss these things. Okay, think about if it were to come charging at you, any of these events, how prepared are you? And do some amount of scenario planning and contingency thinking. Okay, um,
yeah.
yeah. So I think it's incredibly important that we become aware of these dangers and do some amount of preparation.
Well, let me tell you, Ravi, I think to the viewers who are perhaps, kind of grasping the message that you're conveying, is that, civil society, um, people in general, in any democracy, not just India, but any democracy in the world or any society you live in, is the duty doesn't end with going to the ballot box once every 5 years. You got to be an active, engaged, alert citizen at all times. And just to add to your point, would you agree that inequality, income inequalities, and political or social polarization in India and different parts of the world, which are now pretty rampant and prevalent, could also qualify as, the kind of gray rhinos that can subsume society if we are indifferent to it?
Totally. I was going to ask you because, look, you're a public intellectual, you're a writer, you think about these issues. What you might add to some of the most pressing risks, particularly to India? So, yeah, you've named a couple of extras. So, if you ask me to say what are top three gray rhinos I'd worry about as a citizen in our country, I'd say
Right.
climate and environment would be up there. Another one would be not just inequality. I would say the lack of employment opportunity and economic opportunity for young people is
Right.
just beyond belief, Sanjay. You know,
Yeah.
it's not just, I mean, you read the unemployment numbers and they're dreadful. It's the worst in 50 years,
45
9%.
years and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, all that stuff. But the real statistic to get alarmed about is something called the workforce participation rate, which
Right.
is
Which is
what
declining.
percentage.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah. Which is
No, no,
declining.
no. It's not just declining. Here are three things worrying about it. It's 40%. That means 6 out of 10 young Indians don't even bother looking for work. They've given up and they're
Yeah.
engaged in some sort of informal activity and handouts that just keep them going. The second one is it's declining. The third one is the participation rate for women is 20%, and it's the lowest of any
Mm.
country. And so, if you look at this powder keg and the ways in
Right.
which this frustration and can manifest, it's quite worrying. A third one would be polarization, and maybe we should unpack the issue of polarization because you, in particular, have talked and written and cared a lot about it.
Well, I want to, Ravi, frankly, just add one point that I believe the beauty of our country is this cultural diversity. As you've written in your book, we are like a Europe in one country. My senior colleague Sashi Tharoor describes it as a thali that you eat in a restaurant. Different colors, different tastes, different flavors. That's what makes us unique. And this whole attempt on language that you're hearing now, and the fact that you're being constantly reminded that a certain majority community is in danger. I mean, this is like so brazen. It's very disturbing, and I do hope that we embrace this challenge because to everyone out there, it's not just the job of somebody like me who may be in politics. Ultimately, we get the government we deserve, or we get the political parties we choose, and it at some point it comes back to bite you. Ravi, when you and I were growing up, I remember the conversation in the middle class India that I was part of, where we said, politics doesn't affect my life. And I think today it encroaches into your domain without your knowledge. It can find out data on your mobile phone. It can find out your photographs through that Pegasus software issue that we talked about. Right? So there are fundamental issues of governance that maybe India is not even aware of.
Yeah, no, this is a very disturbing thing, and it's also global. If you
Yeah.
see this issue of polarization and its twin called trust or
Right.
mistrust,
Right.
you see the world polarized like never before, right? You've got now the revival of the Cold War, and a polarized world, which so you've got the West, you've got China, and then you've got Russia, and those two may get together or whatever. But this is going to affect every one of us. It's not some distant war in Ukraine. It's this polarization is affecting inflation. This is affecting globalization, and trade and opportunities for a lot of us. Then you look
Yeah.
at polarization within countries. There are now increasing number of books, Sanjay, which I am fascinated by, which predict a civil war in the U.S. before 2050. Okay, so it's just staggering to think that this might happen. And of course, in our own country, you've talked about the fracture lines. And the problem with polarization, which I want our viewers to understand, is it's not just about polarization along a religious divide. Okay, it's not just about Hindu Muslim versus Muslims or whatever. The fundamental problem with polarization is it makes us distrust each other.
Mm. True.
And when we don't trust each other, what happens is you can't come together to solve problems.
Yeah.
Okay, so you take anything like farm bill, agricultural reform. We all know that agriculture does need reform, and there's some attempt to try and make things a little better. But because trust levels are so low, you got a whole section that decides to oppose it, and you roll it back, status quo. And like this, it is true of so many issues. So our collective societal ability to come together and solve the
Yeah.
problems of our age is just declining. And and as we trust each other and institutions less and less, guess what happens? We become tribal, we become feudal, we huddle with the groups that we trust. Okay, and that's not how you create a $5 trillion economy. You
You don't,
simply
you don't, you don't. And Ravi, frankly, in politics, we keep saying we live in echo chambers. We are segregated. And as you rightly mentioned somewhere in a book, what we are witnessing is the death of dialogue and discussion. Very worrisome, but of course, that's something we will definitely talk about as we go forward. You brought in jobs as one of the biggest crisis points in our country, and I think a challenge for the young going forward with the impact of technology and AI and so on. And you have advocated very intelligently, and I think the young will be delighted to know further from you, Ravi, about having an entrepreneurial mindset, being more project driven, being freelancer, or just kind of being a lot more on your own as opposed to the regular jobs that people in your and my generation did. I want to become an IAS, I want to get a doctor, engineer, go to the US and do something. How do you see this remarkable change? Because I do see a lot of young people today want to be DJs, people
yeah,
who have
that's
made
great.
TikTok becomes a source of income, or
Totally.
a reel or
So
whatever it's called now.
it's fascinating to see this change, which is called, the future of work. So
Future. Yeah.
for our parents' generation, those who were lucky enough to get some education and find a job, you simply entered a tunnel and exited 40 years later. Okay. In our generation, thanks to liberalization, globalization, whatever, many more of us could aspire to good jobs, stable jobs. Now, what I'm realizing is a stable job is a nearly obsolete artifact of an industrial era, which will be relevant to fewer and fewer people. Why this is happening is we're just seeing extraordinary levels of turbulence and disruption. So, companies are also beginning to say, look, I want to have a stable core of employees, and I'm going to be as flexible in my arrangements, use subcontractors, use consultants, use gig workers to do as much as possible. And also they themselves are going through rough times. So you think about Jet Airways, right? A company we barely remember, but you
Yeah.
could have been a star performer in Jet Airways and hard landing. It does you it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So you see even a great company like Boeing or IBM fall on hard times and lay off
Yeah.
tons of people. So for all these reasons, I say, look, and there's one more reason: we're living longer. So most of us who are on this call will live into our 80s, some will live into our 90s. So retiring at 60 and all is crazy. And at the same, so you want to be productive and employed and engaged till you're 70, 75, but companies don't like anybody who's over 40. So get prepared to have at least half your life being on your own. So my advice to everybody is, look, it's nice to find a job, but a job should be seen as a launching pad for being on your own. Okay.
Got you.
The faster you can learn to be a freelancer, self employed, or best yet, start your own business and can create employment for a few more, the better off you are. And the key to doing that is figure out the intersection of what you're good at, what you enjoy doing, and what the world wants. So if you studied engineering, but you hate the damn thing, you're really not good at it. The world doesn't need one more shitty engineer. Okay. And to your point, look, you're actually a fantastic DJ. You're a fabulous comedian. Your skill is making people just laugh and feel good. Dump the engineering thing and go down that path. You're more
Yeah.
likely to be successful. You're more likely to have a good life and that's sustainable. The world needs people who are doing what they love, and living to their potential. It doesn't need a frustrated engineer or
True.
whatever, civil servant or whatever it is. So that's an encouraging message. And I give lots of examples of people who are making these choices, including you and I,
Yeah.
right? And so if you want practical ideas on how do you actually accomplish this, because to many people, this sounds terrifying. Okay. The idea of not having a stable job and being on your own feels very scary. In fact, it's liberating. I would never go back to the old way. Neither would
True.
anybody else who
True.
found
True.
their way here.
Yeah,
So,
I completely agree, Ravi, and to everybody on the program. Ravi and I have both kind of gone on our own path, less traveled, if I can use that cliche. And I think once you do that, you don't want to ever go back to that traditional kind of passage anymore. So you have got to dare, you got to be bold, you got to dream, guys.
yeah. And here's the other thing I want to add, Sanjay. People sometimes worry, oh, that's too risky. Okay. Yeah, sure. Going down this path has some risk. You may succeed, you may not succeed. It feels, there's some rough patches. But if you think that holding on to your job in some large company is risk free, think
Oh
again.
yeah, think
It has
again.
its
Yeah,
own set of risks
yeah,
because
yeah,
the management could change, your boss changes,
yeah,
there's a reorg, and it's like musical chairs. The music stopped, you don't have a chair. So in life,
absolutely.
as long as you're alive, there are risks of doing something, and there's an even greater risk of doing nothing. So
Yeah,
get on with it.
yeah, yeah. Good one. And I'm sure everyone is following what Mr. Musk is doing with Twitter at the moment, but that's for another time. Tell me one thing, Ravi. Since you rightly mentioned that AI is going to be one of the game-changing, not just technologies, but the way it's going to impact the workplace and perhaps the future. Do you see the ability of individuals and human beings to kind of be aware of their emotional intelligence, that even as the world gets more automated, the need for relationships, communication, what we call as soft skills, actually becomes more integral and relevant?
Very, very crucial point. The crucial point. Look, in my book, I talk about this fantastic project within Google called Project Oxygen. And some 4 or 5 years ago, they looked at who are the people who've succeeded spectacularly within Google, who are the best Googlers, and what makes them so successful. And much to their
Right.
own surprise, it wasn't the people who were the best programmers or architects and the best techies. The people who
Right.
succeeded spectacularly were those who had people skills, okay, what you call emotional quotient. And in
Yeah.
particular, they looked at the skills that mattered were empathy, the ability
Yeah.
to sense opportunity, the ability to sense, feelings, that sort of thing. A second one was those who were able to collaborate with others, so and be inclusive to other viewpoints and ideas, critical
Yeah.
thinking, problem solving, creativity. These are exactly the things that make us more human, and which are exactly the things that AI and machines cannot yet do. Okay. Machine today still doesn't have empathy or creativity. It'll change over time, but not anytime soon. So
Yeah.
paradoxically, the way to succeed in a world of increasing automation and AI is to become and be more human. Okay. you know there are very, very few things that we can do as individuals. More and more, we have to work and collaborate with each other in any work we do, right?
Yeah.
You- so if we looked at jobs which don't require you to interact with other humans too much, okay, and there are things, and there are handful of those. Truck driver, okay, there is software programmer. You can sit in your behind your thing and just crank out some code, or accountant, or medical transcription, or data entry. Every one of these jobs is the ones that's most at risk of being automated.
Yeah.
Okay. But then you say DJ, comedian, oh, the examples you used earlier, they're the most safe when it
Yeah.
comes to it. So my point is, you can't outrun machines at what they're inherently good at. I think the way you sort of carve out your space for yourself, which is a bit future proof, is by being more human, learning to get along with other people much better. The ultimate human quality is leadership. which is the ability to get other people to join you in doing something interesting. So, and the
Well,
sad
Ravi, Ravi, just to interrupt you, since you brought leadership up, and I do want to ask you to share this experience that you actually narrate of this young 12-year boy who lives in your city of Bengaluru called Rehan Sheikh. Everyone assumes that the leader is that muscular macho man who's got this big broad chest and so on. But I do believe that somewhere down the line that Rehan Sheikh's story is poignant and is brilliant. I just believe that story needs to be told. And Ravi,
yeah.
if you can share that, it'll be
So
amazing.
great. In a nutshell, Rehan Sheikh is today a 13-year-old. When I first heard about him, he was 11. And he lives with his family in a municipal garbage dump, not in Bangalore, but outside Ahmedabad. And, you know, um, we heard about him through Teach for India, which ran a small center out there where he was. And what he was doing, this was pre COVID. Already pre COVID, what he was doing was organizing the kids in the rubbish heap, and the elder kids would teach the younger kids, okay, because nobody had access to school. Some of the
Right.
older kids were going for a Teach for India school. They'd
Right.
come back, and then they started taking on small projects in their community to make things better. Then COVID hits, and he organizes this army of young people and friends to start delivering food packets from a NGO that was making it available into the community. Getting people help with access to oxygen, and they were running a lifeline service out there. And I use this example to point out that I think we need to completely change the way we think about leadership. Leadership is not title, authority, power. It is about a behavior. Leadership in the 21st century, I think, is about, I call it a verb, not a noun. And I use
Mm,
this to
mm.
encourage all of us to think about, the leadership qualities that we have. If we want a functioning society, want to be personally successful, it's going to happen because we don't wait to be rescued by some leader on a white horse with a big
Yeah.
chest or anything, but we start solving some of the problems around us. And you don't wait for permission. You don't wait for somebody to come and ask you to do it and give you authority to do it. You just decide to, you know, take the lead. And I give many examples of people who are doing that, like my neighbor in Bangalore, who's a housewife who's become the leading waste warrior. I give examples of people and companies who are not necessarily at the middle management or the top, but who are doing transformational things.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, man, look, leadership is there in every person. It is made, not born. Okay, it's
Yeah,
a
you made that
muscle.
point. Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
muscle that you develop by using it. In my work with UNICEF, in the introduction, we talked about my work with UNICEF. The thing we do most well is go into the poorest government schools, the poorest socioeconomic backgrounds, and get young people to start taking on these kind of small projects. Like the school toilet is broken, you're tired and frustrated of complaining, and nobody gives a shit. And so we encourage them to go find two friends and go fix the toilet and support them in doing that. And that becomes transformational. They realize, hey, I don't have to ask and plead and beg. I can actually solve some problems. And when I do that, other frustrated people join me. So,
Mm.
wow, I can take on bigger problems. And there the leadership journey begins. So, to our viewers today, listeners today, I'd say find things that you're passionate about, things that frustrate you, and don't wait for somebody else to go solve them. Get on with it. Be the change you wish to see in the world, is what Bapuji said.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
no,
that's the
excellent,
essence.
excellent. And I hope, Ravi, that people from my Congress party also watch this recording to know that leaders are made, they're not born. And that could solve a
That
lot of the issues that the
that was a
party
nice
has.
jab, Sanjay.
One of the nicest things about your book, and I would just tell this very openly, and hats off to you, because I've met very few people, forget leaders in general, people tend to hide their insecurities, their fears, their apprehensions, anxieties, trauma, whatever it may be. And I feel one of the most refreshing things about your fantastic book, in my opinion, is your ability to confront your demons. And to the viewers, Ravi Venkatesan, remarkably successful, in my opinion, an extraordinary, iconic person that you have to know at a personal level to really realize what his potential is and what his capabilities are. Uh, Talks about his issues that he's battled as he's gone along. And I'll be happy to share with you, Ravi, that I was interviewing Sashi Tharoor, my senior colleague, some time ago for his book. And you know what he and I both have in common? When we were growing up and we were very young, there were certain events that happened. And for a long time, we grew up with this terrible paranoia about losing our father.
Yeah,
And it
yeah.
was it was a state of distress for him. It was an emotional devastation for me, because I used to worry about my dad every time he went out of home. I was not sure if he was
Mm.
going to come back, and we all kind of suffered through this. There was no concept of a therapist at that point of time. There was no one to advise you, no one to counsel you, but you battled it all. Ravi, a question. Ravi, can you hear me?
Now I can. The internet was bad. Now I
Did,
can. Yes,
did,
but I
did
heard
you
you so
lose me
far.
for a bit?
Yeah, it was bad, but it's fine. So your question is,
So my question to you is, you know, I want to ask you this question: why are people so inhibited in expressing their vulnerability?
it's a great question, right? If you want to be, if I mean, those of us who are able to be vulnerable, I think have a combination of two things. One is you feel fairly secure and self-confident about yourself. So you don't
Right,
mind discussing your weaknesses, your setbacks, your failures, all these things,
right,
fears.
right, right.
And it requires self-awareness. So these are two things that have to come together. Now, one would normally assume that as you become older, you hopefully become more self-aware, more, and as you become more successful, you feel more secure. But that's not often the case.
Mm,
Okay, so very, very often you find people becoming older, more successful, but yeah, they're more paranoid rather than. And I think a lot of it has to do with who you're surrounded by.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So in my own case, I think I was surrounded first accidentally, then intentionally. I had people in my life who loved me but kept me honest. Okay. So my
yeah,
mom was like that. She loved me greatly, but she would tell it like it is. My wife is like that. On my leadership teams across all these organizations and adventures, I usually had people who respected me, cared a lot about me, but would speak truth to power and say, Ravi, you're full of shit, or that's a dreadful mistake, or, or whatever. And through this process, I, I became more self aware. And I realized that the respect people had for me was not contingent on my being perfect, on knowing it all. And in
yeah.
fact, when I was willing to admit that I had made a mistake, or when I was willing to admit my vulnerability, it actually created more trust and more followership. And so, I
People saw
was
you as more human, as more like themselves as well. Yeah,
correct, because I think people are very intuitive. They know when you're pretending. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
It's a,
They know when you are trying to bullshit, basically. Yeah,
Correct.
yeah,
And so when
yeah,
you say, look, I also don't know, let's figure it out together,
yeah, yeah. True, true.
suddenly there's a great relief.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And, um, in my book, I felt that's one of the most useful things I could do, which is give.
Ravi, let me take you back on your book. There is that one part that I found absolutely, I could relate to that. When you mentioned that you go to meet your former boss in the Yellowstone Park at his ranch. And can you just explain that briefly? It was a lovely day, but you were down and out. And what did
Yeah.
it teach you? I'm sure many
Oh, so
people have experienced this.
yeah, there was a moment that when I was in a place visiting my former boss. Everything was perfect in life. Okay, I had no great stresses at home. I had no great stresses at work. I was in a spectacular place on a beautiful day with a person I like. There was nothing not to like. And I remember sitting in that moment, and my mind was anxious. It was unable to enjoy this moment where things were to perfection. And that's the day the penny dropped for me, Sanjay, because I had spent 47 years of my life at that point arranging things to be perfect, believing that when they were perfect, I'd be happy. And having arrived at that moment, I was not joyous. I was actually miserable. And I said, wow, there's something wrong here. Everything around you is the way you wished it to be. You worked hard to get there. The world sees you as successful, and yet you can't be joyous. So that was the trigger. It was like Buddha. He saw those three signs and then decides, forget this. This is not the right path. I'm going to go out and figure out my path. So that
Yeah.
was a powerful trigger for me to go and say, well, if all this achievement, success, working hard to make money that you can spend to create beauty around you doesn't make you happy, then what will? So that began a 10-year journey, a journey I'm still on, to then say, how do I redefine my theory of happiness? How do I redefine success? And how can I, become more joyous?
Yeah.
And I write a lot about that in that last chapter of my book,
Yeah, you
which
do.
is,
You
which is
do.
a strange chapter. It's a very strange chapter. How do you
Yeah.
talk about these things in a way that is
Yeah.
useful?
Well, I want to tell the viewers that Ravi's last chapter actually is reflecting on success and happiness, and there is so much on it, on navigating your career and how much money do you need to be happy. That's a very fundamental question you have asked. But I'm going to ask you to kind of expand on that game that we all played on the cardboards. I remember snakes and ladders, and you have actually extended that beautifully in your book to talk about, hey, listen, that's life. How would you like to kind of tell the viewers on the entire program today as to how each one of us somewhere down the line gets some kind of an escalator to ride up, but hey, you never know what's waiting for you around the corner.
Yeah, that wiggly thing. So
Yeah.
I hope everybody still knows snakes and ladders. I don't know if this generation still remembers it, but it's
Well, they will
that.
Google it. They'll Google it otherwise. Yeah.
But it's that beautiful game which requires no skill, and it's just a game of luck. And you throw a dice, and then sometimes you land on a ladder and you shoot up, and sometimes you land on a snake and you get gobbled up, and it resets your
Yeah.
life. And I
Yeah.
see this very much as a metaphor for life. Sometimes there are random events which are great luck. You land a job at Flipkart before it goes public or something like that. Okay, you meet the perfect person in life and you decide to be together. So sometimes you do that, and then other times you end up on something that sets back your life a great deal. And so this chapter is about warning people about the nature of the threats and dangers and risks out there. So one of them is, for instance, temptation. There are
Mm.
just today in our time we had temptation. This is not something new, but today the number of temptations is just way higher,
Yeah.
right? And usually temptations fall into two buckets. It's either greed, okay, an opportunity to get richer than you deserve, faster than you deserve, shortcuts, or it's lust, okay. And both of them can have, temptation can have, grave consequences, and we are aware of spectacular people who flamed out. you know
Yeah.
i,
Yeah.
I give examples of them, but this can happen to any one of us. Another one which I see a rising danger of is falling for f- fake narratives, false news, false heroes, okay, and deciding to believe something or follow something only to be led over the cliff. Okay. And
True.
there's much, 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 much greater risk today, thanks to social media, the internet,
Right.
and
Right.
all these things. So there's that. There's, I think, in our time, there was always risk of making bad decisions, but today the risks of just those and the consequences of those are much greater. So let's talk about, look, how do you become more aware of these threats and how do you equip yourself to create some guardrails so you don't go off. And
Right.
fundamentally, I talk about simple things like, who do you learn to trust? Okay, where do you get your information, and how do you make sure it's not a complete bullshit?
Yeah.
Okay, how do you how do you make choices around who you hang out with? Because to the greatest extent, the five people you hang out with most determine what you believe, what you define as success, and the way in which, what opportunities come to you. So I think this is inordinately important, Sanjay, for everyone.
Yeah, it is, and I'm just going to tell you this, that I remember playing this game, and as Ravi mentioned, there is one big fat snake in that last mile, and if your die manages to unfortunately get consumed by that, you actually go back literally to square one. I
Yeah.
remember, in the 90s, it was the most treacherous terrain ever. Ravi, how many times did you get tripped by that big, fat, green, dangerous looking? I think it was a cobra. Nasty guy. And I think that's a lesson in life, huh? That think about it, Ravi, that you had Bill Clinton, perhaps the most popular president America had seen, and he became a butt of jokes. I remember picking up books in Mumbai's traffic intersections on Bill Clinton jokes, and you
Yeah.
realize this is what can happen to you in that great moment of weakness,
Yeah.
and
And
that's what snakes and ladders is. Yeah,
you I just, you right now, who's one of the people in the news is Chitra Ramakrishnan, who's the
yeah,
CEO of NSE. And you look at her professional trajectory, it's like zooming like this. A person of no great pedigree or anything, she becomes the very, very powerful head of the largest
right,
exchange derivatives exchange in the world. And
right.
equally quickly, she's in jail. So
Yeah,
ladder,
it's
snake.
incredible. Yeah. Incredible,
Yeah,
absolutely incredible. I think that's a perfect example, actually. And when you look around, celebrities, sports stars, everyone has what you rightly mentioned, has to survive in that VUCA world. Everybody knows what VUCA means. And I'm just going to tell people that post your comments if you have any questions, because I can go on and on. But one question that, Ravi, I have to ask you is, you mentioned about this book that even I love, the Second Mountain. I think David Brooks' book. And it's an interesting one, that at some point when you have fulfilled a lot of your milestones in life that you chased, you realize that, hang on, happiness and satisfaction is ultimately a state of mind. And when you begin to ride, or rather climb, the second mountain, it just kind of completely opens up a new world. Would you like to kind of tell us, where are you? You've come down the first mountain. You have definitely gone up the second mountain. Where are you, and how do you look at this part of your journey?
yeah. Let's first explain the idea to our
Yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah,
viewers. So the point is, we all start out in life, and the initial focus is very largely on ourselves, right? So you
yeah,
want to be successful, you want to get complete your education well, get a good job, climb the ladder in a good job, create some economic, um, you know, consequences for yourself, marry the right person, start a family, be respected by society. It's a lot about you. And then, we each are successful to a different degree. And, some point in your 40s, usually, you reach a point where you said, shucks, I thought this much would make me happy, but having
yeah.
achieved even this much, two things, I'm not happy. And when I look around me, there are any number of dudes who climbed higher mountains. It doesn't matter how high you are. I might feel successful. Then I look at Satya Nadella at Microsoft and I say, shit, you know, or whatever. And on any
Yeah,
dimension, you
yeah,
can see people who have climbed much greater mountains, and you suddenly humble and you recognize, hmm, this is not really the objective. And if this is not it, what is? And so you usually, that's a good sign to start thinking about others. And this is not a new construct, right? One of the best quotes I ever um, read was by Carl Jung. He says the first chapter of a person's life is when they set out to conquer the world. All of us start on that journey. The second chapter is when you realize that the world is not going to be conquered by somebody as modest as you. And the third chapter is making peace with this. So, the third chapter is the same as the second mountain, where you realize, I'm human. I'm actually fairly ordinary, no matter how much you've achieved or accomplished.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, if this is not it, what is? And
Right.
this is where I
Right.
throw in the Mark Twain thing. There are only 2 days that matter in your life: the day you were born and the day you figure out why. So I reached that point uh, in that incident we talked about earlier at Yellowstone, when I said everything I've worked for is not giving me joy. And so I have to redefine it. And so I started climbing down the first mountain, up the second mountain. And 10 years later, I'd say I'm very much in the foothills of the second mountain. And I would say the main thing I've learned is, look, there's nothing very special about any one of us. All of us are going to be forgotten very, very soon after we are gone, except by a handful of people, whose lives are intertwined with ours. And so I said, okay, let's accept that. How do I live my life in a way that I don't regret? If my time is up tonight at 7 o'clock, how do I make sure that I've lived in a way that I won't regret it? So I've made choices very differently, Sanjay, about what I do, about who I spend time with, and the kind of person I wish to be. Okay.
Yeah. And
So
let me tell you, Ravi. Sorry. Please finish. Yeah.
that's it. That's it. So
Yeah.
I am now much more modest about the impact I'm going to be having in this world, about how long I'm going to be remembered by whom. It's going to be about a nanosecond. And I focus just on making sure that when my time comes, I don't have too many regrets about anything. I lived well. I spent time with the people I really love and care about and enjoyed. I appreciated the beauty of the world, and I left the world slightly better than I found it. Okay,
Yeah.
if I
Yeah.
can, that's it.
and,
Very
and that's the
modest.
and that's the second mountain. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you're hearing Ravi Venkatesan, unassuming as ever, and his book, by the way, has an endorsement from Bill Gates, where Bill Gates says, as the world grows in complexity, Ravi's guidance to be curious and adaptable has never been more relevant. When you look at this book, what the heck do I do with my life? How to flourish in our turbulent times? I think, frankly, Ravi, a lot of people will say that, this is a narrative, this is your autobiography, this is also a self-help book. But one of the big learnings that you've given here is that, probably majority of young people today are in a rat race culture, living in a shark tank, and you got to look at life much beyond that. And if you know it early, you're only going to be a gainer. Would you agree with that?
Totally, except I would say that's not the majority. Those
Yeah.
are the lucky ones.
Lucky one.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
that is the sadness about the lucky ones. The
Yeah.
vast majority are still struggling to make ends meet,
Yeah.
trying to figure out, how, yeah, just how to survive.
Yeah.
And when you look at India, where we have 300 million young people,
Right.
about 200 million of them are actually out of this, and less than 100 million are still in that lucky position
Yeah.
that you talk about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but yes, they are this. It need not be so. The empowering message here is, doesn't matter how chaotic, dark the world around you is. If you have the right mindset, if you make the right choices, if you live more intentionally, you can carve out a pretty reasonable life for yourself, a happy life for yourself and those around you.
Yeah.
That's the empowering message.
Well, let me tell you, Ravi, I think I don't know how time has really flown. We have just about crossed a few minutes over an hour. I think this has been like literally like one of those fast express experiences. But I want to conclude by asking you, because through your book, I can see a Gandhian person. I can see in values, or in a great number of ways, a manifestation of your larger ideology is a Gandhian sentiment. And hey, we got a question from Devata Mishra. Post-pandemic era has seen the surge of work from home mode. From how is it going to improve? Okay, so from startup to MNCs, how is it going to improve? So one question on work from home. But my last question to you before we take a question is: do you believe somewhere down the line that India is now probably forgetting Mahatma Gandhi? Do you feel that way sometimes? Does it worry you? Be honest.
No, I think Gandhi is a man who's largely forgotten, except for some tokenism
Mm,
in India and all around the world. And it's really quite tragic, because the more I have read and understood of the man and his messages, the more relevant it is for our times. I cannot count the number of times I find myself quoting Gandhiji. He says, for instance, there's enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. When you look at the planet, what are we suffering from? We're suffering from unbridled greed, consumption, instead of people living, you know, within their needs, and therefore giving nature half a chance. He says, find the purpose, the means will follow. That's one of the most empowering things I can think of. Okay, that what matters in life is not your starting point and your resources. What matters is a sense of purpose and mission and resourcefulness. What a
yeah.
powerful message for the times. Be the change you wish to be in the world. It doesn't matter that somebody else is doing something completely evil or wrong around you. Can you be a beacon of hope and be the change you wish to see? I just think he's a spectacular man, and if only we would bother to go back and understand his messages more, the world would be more beautiful, more harmonious. Certainly, our life. Forget changing the world. Just if you apply it to your own life, his messages are just like more relevant today than even in his time. It's ironic, because I have a very close connection with Gandhiji just by accident. I married a lady who's a great granddaughter of Gandhiji, and
Oh,
and right here next
that's
to me
incredible.
is
Mhm.
one of the writing desks that he used. It's the most treasured
Really?
possession.
Wow.
It's one
Wow.
of the
Wow.
most
You.
treasured possessions in ours. When you sit there and say, "Wow, I'm trying to write a book. I'm trying to poorly express some ideas," at the same desk where the great man once wrote something, you feel a whole surge of
That's
energy. And
remarkable. That's remarkable. Well, Ravi, I envy you for that because I'm a big believer that Gandhi, in a great number of ways, who inspired Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, Barack Obama, and if India begins to forget the man, I think somewhere down the line, I think we are probably forgetting our history, and in a great number of ways, we could only taint our future.
yeah, but Sanjay, it doesn't matter what India does or doesn't. What matters is what you remember and what
Yeah,
you do. That's what we should remind our audience. Okay,
true.
be the
Yeah,
change.
be the change, absolutely. And so, Ravi, now one question which was asked by Ms. Mitra was, how do you see post-pandemic age? As you can see in the question, how is it going to change the workplace? This hybrid working or work from home?
Look, this hybrid working is, I think, the future. I don't think it's possible to bring people back and cram them in crowded buildings and expect them to be there 5 days a week, 6 days a week. And companies also finding there are more advantages to being hybrid than downsides. I think it's the greatest, most empowering thing out there, because what it says is a person with a certain skill anywhere can access work and opportunity somewhere else and get paid for it. And particularly for India, I think this is IT 3.0, if you will. In the IT revolution so far has been about Indian IT companies hiring low cost, smart people and serving clients everywhere. If you think about taking this to a much greater scale in a much more decentralized fashion, where Sanjay Jha sitting wherever he wishes to be, serving a client or accessing an opportunity somewhere else and getting paid by Bitcoin, so you don't have to worry about how do I get paid. This is an extraordinary revolution in the way we think about work and leveling the playing field in terms of access to opportunity that there is. And yeah, I'm enormously excited about the possibilities here.
Well, Ravi, let me tell you something that okay, so here there's a lovely comment from Aditya Bharat, who's enjoyed our conversation and is going to connect with you on LinkedIn. Well, I want to tell you one thing, Ravi, that as we wrap up, that you mentioned in your book, and I think that's so true. There is no such thing as a retirement age. Ladies and gentlemen, Ravi and I are not going away anywhere, okay? I just want to tell you, Ravi, I played tennis this afternoon and I beat a guy half my age. The score was around 6-4, and
Oh,
exactly what you mentioned, Ravi. I mean, Meher, you have very gently given us a subtle message that we need to stop, but Ravi and I are capable of going for another hour non-stop. But we shall comply with your entire protocol. But I want to tell everybody, grab this book. I'm putting it up again. This is a book that is so much fun to read. Ravi talks about other books that he's read. He narrates stories, and without your knowledge, by the time you finish the book, you'll feel a burst of energy in you, and you start executing and implementing some of his ideas without even thinking about it. So, Ravi, wonderful to have a chat with you, my friend. Good luck with this book, and I have a strong feeling it's going to change lives of everyone who reads it. Thank you very
thank
much.
you. Thank you, Sanjay. I feel energized just listening to you.
Thank you.
And that, it's fabulous to be reconnected. I want to thank Kalinga for this opportunity and bringing all of us together this evening. And I'd encourage anybody who's interested in continuing the conversation, who asked questions, couldn't get a response because these two old guys couldn't stop talking to each other, to connect on LinkedIn. That's a great, great platform where I try my best to, be more individually relevant. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. And as much as that you'd like to go on for us, oh, I think we'd like to go on listening to you because I was glued to the screen for the entire 1 hour, 12 minutes that we've been on. But just like Ravi sir said, I mean, asked, when would you like to be young? That's the question that we started with. And the more that I think about this question, the more layers I find in it. So thank you for putting forth that question and not just answers in this conversation. And you talked about thinking over what we might regret some years down the line. You also shed light on how the COVID-19 pandemic was not entirely, out of the blue, how communal hatred and climate change are the gray rhinos, how polarization is also a threat alongside climate change and the declining labor force participation rate, and also how leadership is a muscle that can be toned. And thank you so much for quoting Carl Jung and Mark Twain to encourage us to take that one step that brings us closer to joy and one step away from fear. So thank you so much, sir, for all the, for this entire conversation. And of course, thank you, Sanjay sir, for asking questions ranging from, Ravi sir's experience with the various organizations that he has worked in, to his views on being removed from social media and what kind of impact does it have. And thank you so much for asking about the difference between the black swans and the gray rhinos, these events, and also about if income inequality is a gray rhino. Why do people show less? I mean, they're not very comfortable with showing their vulnerabilities, and so much more has happened in this conversation. So thank you so much, Sanjay sir, for bringing all these questions on the table and just enlightening us all around. And on behalf of Kalinga Literary Festival, I, Meher Gandhi, would like to thank everyone, all the audience members for joining us today. Of course, I thank you, Ravi sir and Sanjay sir. And Kalinga Literary Festival is actively conducting literary events, and you can keep up with our activities and events through our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram accounts. And we hope to see you there. And that's all for today. Thank you. Have a good
Thank you
evening.
very much.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Bye bye.
Take care. Take care. Ravi, I'm
Nice.
connecting with you later.
Thank you. I'd like that.